I suppose that you most of you are with us for the morning itself. So I think we have great pleasure in welcoming all of you, and we are extremely happy that all of you responded very positively to the invitation from our chairman and honorable finance minister. And in fact, I would like to say that there's not even a single person whom we invited declined. And some, so you are all here, and we welcome you for this session. And I think the state of state finances, which after FRBM and which Professor J.D. Ghosh will be moderating the session, we have other eminent speakers to reflect upon this issue. And building on to the last session, I'm very sure that we will be able to come out with something very concrete to take the agenda forward. So thank you very, very much. Welcome all of you once again on behalf of my honorable, my chairman and my faculty, my colleagues in the institute. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and great thanks to GIFT and to Kerala government and to Thomas Isaac for hosting this. It's been a fascinating set of discussions this morning already. All of us who have listened have learned a lot. I'm not going to take long. I just want to highlight, what has emerged and is very, very clear is state finances were already in a very, very great, terrible situation well before the COVID pandemic struck. The states are being asked to do all of the heavy lifting in terms of pandemic, right? Economic falling. And yet they are not given the resources. And several including of having special grants given for the pandemic, possibly through the Finance Commission or otherwise. One aspect that struck me that I thought might deserve a little bit more discussion is about the role of the RBI. And whether the RBI should not be buying bonds at this point, or from the state governments as well. We see that this is happening in the United States, that the US Federal Reserve. I'm sorry, there's a lot of noise. Is there a lot of noise back in the background? What is happening? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
So what struck
which
me,
is, if someone could just mute. Sorry, there's a lot of noise. If someone could, if people could just mute, because it's very difficult to hear. Sorry. Okay. So
one of the things that struck me is that it would be useful also to talk about the role of the central bank. In other countries, we find that the central bank is buying up bonds of not just the federal government or central government, but also of state governments. And there is a real case for encouraging the RBI now to buy up the bonds issued by state governments, so that when they are forced to borrow, they don't have to also actually engage in very, very high interest rate borrowing, as Kerala has had to do in the recent past. So I just want to put that out there as one of the issues that we might consider in terms of accessing finance right now. I completely agree with the demand for grants, but we have to think of all possible ways at this. I don't know who is making all that noise, but whoever it is, please mute your mic.
Even number you said there. Going meeting number.
I think it is the GIFT people who are making a lot of noise. Can you please not mute your mics? I'm going to now request. I'm going to request Yamini to. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, do you want to start? Did you hear me at all? I mean, there's a lot of other stuff going on with.
Well, if you could just give a quick summary, because there's a lot of background noise, so I wasn't able to hear you carefully.
I have to ask the organizers also, because a lot of Malayalam conversation is happening. If you could just mute your mics when we are speaking. Thank you.
We are silent already, totally.
Okay. what I was basically saying is that one of the essential points to have come out this morning is that the states have to handle not only the pandemic, but the economic catastrophe that has come about with the lockdowns, etc. But they have no money with which to do it. Many suggestions are being offered, including that of special grants, either mobilized by the Finance Commission or otherwise. I was suggesting that we should also look at the role of the central bank and basically have the RBI buy up bonds of state governments as well at the existing lowest possible rate. This is being done in all other countries wherever there are federal systems, and it is one of the ways in which state governments, at least their borrowing costs would not be as high if in fact they were able to access these bonds purchased by the RBI. That's one possibility. The other thing I think is that whatever large expenditures we are in general asking the central government to undertake, it's very clear that all of these would have to be done through the state governments, whether it is through the food or it is for income transfers or any other kind of expenditure. And we therefore need some kind of mechanism for identifying the distribution of those. I don't think that is a Finance Commission matter. But it's also the case that the pandemic is playing out differently in different states. Different states have different degrees of fiscal capacity. And so there has to be some kind of way in which you would get an equitable sharing, even of the additional resources that the central government will have to spend for recovery and for dealing with the health pandemic. So these are just the two introductory points I wanted to make. And maybe now I can request Yamini to start.
Thank you so much, Professor Ghosh, and thank you everyone for such an important and enlightening day. I never thought that I would find myself staring at my phone and my computer with very few breaks from 10 a.m. in the morning, but this has been such a important, and really one has learned so much that I really appreciate that the organizers have put together this seminar under what are quite difficult circumstances and kept us all riveted on what is a fairly complex and difficult subject. I am completely in agreement with a lot of the discussion that has taken place since the morning. But I thought I'd use my, Jayati, we have 7 minutes?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Sure.
That's
I thought I'd use my
second round.
Yeah, I'd use my 5 or 7 minutes just to touch upon two things that I think we do need to talk about when we are talking about state finances, and particularly in the context of what I see, at least for the immediate next 3 months, next 6 months challenges of strengthening our health infrastructure and ensuring that basic social protection mechanisms are put in place as we reel from the consequences of the current lockdown, and in all likelihood stay in a scenario where lockdowns are going to continuously be part and parcel of the policy response to the pandemic as it unfolds. As Professor Ghosh rightly said, that the experience of the pandemic is going to be very, very state specific, and the health needs of the pandemic, and in fact the economic needs of the pandemic, as we see things unfold, are also going to be extremely state specific. And therefore we have to be able to think about designing a interstate formula that is able to be much more agile and responsive to these scenarios as they unfold. We are essentially operating behind the veil of ignorance because we don't really know how this is going to unfold. And that therefore reiterates a point that was discussed in the previous session about the urgency of a robust interstate coordination mechanism. Whether that coordination mechanism is through the Interstate Council as it exists today, which, as was rightly pointed out in the previous session, has significant challenges, especially because its home is the Home Ministry. But by the way, let's not forget the National Disaster Management Act and the NDRMF is also in the home of the Home Ministry. Or this gets created in a separate context is something that should be debated. But I think for the moment, we'll have to live with some of the failures of the current system and at least move the existing platforms and forums as they are to be able to find a way of bringing the NDMA and the NDRF, which also shapes the formula of the for the State Disaster Relief Management Fund, into a consultative and deliberative mechanism that allows for much more agility in the formula so that one can be responsive to state-specific needs as the outbreak unfolds over the course of the next 3 months, 6 months, to a year. The second issue that I wanted to highlight, which we haven't spent, I think, enough time talking about, is the current mode of fiscal transfers that dominate how health infrastructure and social protection expenditure takes place at the state level. And those are the centrally sponsored schemes and the central sector schemes. As Dr. Govind Rao said in the previous session, the National Health Mission has come to be the dominant form of non-wage expenditure in most states. Kerala is an exception, as it is on most things. But not only is it the dominant non-wage expenditure, we must remember that in many states, salaries and wages and salaries and liabilities occupy about 80% of state health budgets. And over the course of the last 15 years, states have got quite used to drawing on NHM to substitute for expenditures that it should have added on to its health expenditures as well. And so NHM becomes extremely, extremely relevant in terms of providing the finances that are needed for states to build up their health infrastructure. Right now, the National Health Mission has 2,000 line items, which makes expenditure near impossible. Over the years, the actual process of spending under the National Health Mission has been so overloaded with paperwork and red tape. In Uttar Pradesh, my colleagues calculated that a single file for release of funds into the NHM societies to the district societies from the state treasury has to go through 22 desks before it gets cleared for funds to be released. So the structure and architecture of how NHM is organized at the moment is such that it makes speedy and effective expenditures extremely difficult. Added to which, this is a scheme that is shared 60-40, which puts a fairly large amount of pressure on state finances to be able to contribute to the overall expenditure of NHM. So I think programs like NHM, we need to move towards at least going back to where it originally was designed, which was to have flexible funds, flexible pools that would allow states to spend through NHM as was necessary for them. And at the same time, so that we get away from this 2,000 line item, 22 to 25 to 35 desks of clearances that need to be, file clearances that need to be ensured in order for expenditures to be released. And at the same time, push a demand for at least 90-10 share ratio, if not 100% share ratio for National Health Mission, so that states are able to spend on in healthcare, which is frankly the need of the hour over and above anything else. Similarly, the same case can be made for the central sector schemes, many of which dominate the expenditures for social protection programs and in particular programs for food and for the provision of food security and for the provision of cash security. The infrastructure and preparedness and ability of states to implement schemes is very varied. And again, if there is an opportunity to bundle these schemes together so that states receive untied funds that they can use for the provision of food security and cash security as they see fit, I think we will be making a significant progress in complementing and supporting states rather than having states run around as they are currently in the PMGKY, implementing schemes that are being implemented, that are being required through the central government, which as we have seen over these last now almost 40 days has caused significant distress on the ground. The ability of the banking networks, the links between people and banks, the ability to reach banks is extremely varied, and in northern states in particular, it's difficult, and therefore states should be in a position to to be able to determine what's the most appropriate mechanism by which they can ensure that they are providing both food and cash security to their citizens in distress. A related issue that we do need to talk about, and I'll stop there, is on the issue of portability of food security and cash security actually for migrant workers. Again, this is a matter that requires deep interstate coordination as well as central support because there are significant spillover effects. We will not be able to bring workers back if we don't ensure that we restore their dignity and their trust in the ability to of protection. And so a portable social security system is the need of the hour, and there has to be steps taken to move in that direction urgently and quickly.
Great, Yamini. I think those were some really important and interesting points. I think Mr. Vijayanand has joined us.
Thank you to the Kerala government, to Dr. Isaac, and to Gift for asking me to speak. It's been a very interesting session. And what I propose to do is to briefly touch upon some of the political and governance issues that were raised, and also try to see what exactly is the game plan, seems to be the game plan to the extent that it has one of the government. The theme of what I'm going to speak about is under the cover of COVID. What is going on in terms of constitutional activity? What is going on in terms of institutional and governance activities? First point that we need to take into account is that it is unprecedented centralization. Under two rather little known acts that have been talked about, Govind Rao mentioned them, the Epidemic Diseases Act and the Disaster Management Act. Now, one would have thought that it would be the Epidemic Diseases Act which would be invoked. That was an old colonial act. But it is the Disaster Management Act 2005, which gives the executive greater powers. So the answer why it was used, in my mind, is that it gave the executive free rein without accountability to Parliament, which then works against any attempt to use Part 3, rather Part 18, where any declaration under the emergency provisions would require some degree of accountability to Parliament, which I think government is not very keen on. The other thing here is that the entry 29 of list 3, which was referred to, is in the concurrent list. So the short point here is that government has been legally well advised in this, as well as in other areas where it has used legal acumen, is that it has chosen the path of least accountability and chosen the path of maximum executive latitude. So I think that's one point that I'd like to make, that we are dealing with a government. All that is legal is not always politically wise or justifiable, but in this case, it's for them to decide. Hasib Drabu in the morning mentioned something called Cannibalistic Federalism. He didn't develop in it, but I think it may refer to something like the slow erosion of powers of the state, a hollowing out of the substance of federalism, where you have the states existing, but as the saying goes, transformed to the level of municipality. What we see under the Disaster Management Act is that there is a parallel line of communication with the district administrations, and there is direct activity in form of these interministerial teams. So this is the big difference, which is what makes me think a lot of time was spent on the question of financial emergency. I agree, if the government does go down that route, one should oppose it strongly. But my feeling is that it will get around the need to declare any such emergency which would involve perhaps less latitude. I think another issue which I would like to pick up before I go to the two main themes of um, uh, my remarks here is the way in which the government is turning to charity and civil service organizations to fulfill state functions. I think this is something that needs to be noted. It's an abdication of state responsibility, and whatever suffering there is in the public domain, whatever arbitrary actions have been taken, need to be redressed by public authorities and not by charity. In that connection, talking about charity, the point has been made of the various relief funds. There's relief fund, the PM Cares, which is a very obvious antecedents and legality. And then, of course, the state. So there are 2 points here that I'd like to make is that uniformly, all central and state funds should be eligible for CSR spending and should be eligible for receiving foreign donations exactly at the same level as the PM Cares. What should the PM Cares fund do? What should be done with it? Well, one simple way would be to distribute it in the way of using the formula of the Finance Commission and distribute it among the states. That would be probably be the least controversial. Now, I think, Jyoti, I haven't looked at my clock, so you'll just give me a sign. Now, the impact on federal governance. Micromanagement of governance has crept in during this, the way in which this whole episode has unfolded. The states, under exceptional powers, with crippled finances, and with an epidemic, a pandemic, which is having a direct impact on state revenues, excise duty, alcohol, petroleum, we know the story. The whole idea that the federal system, which needs to be given its oxygen, because as it's been said, this is the front line, the local health primary health care centers, the ASHAs, and the other auxiliary medical personnel. All those need to have their support, their funding, and that is something that is not happening because of what we said earlier, the emasculated state governments. There is this new thing, and I'm waiting for the next session to know how it went, called the CM's video conferencing. Now, for a moment, I thought that here the center felt the need to consult the states because it saw that the states were moving ahead with their measures and therefore better to follow by leading than to ignore them. What seems to be happening is that the frequencies of these conferences, which is much more than in the last 6 years, we had 3, or if you count today, the 4th one, I'm told that only those who couldn't speak in the last one are being allowed to speak. There's 9 chief ministers. So it's a curious procedure which keeps up the facade of education, but we need to look at it a little more closely as to whether there is any substance to it which gives it something in federal terms. And then the last point here that I'd like to make is that will the center and I think this is an open-ended question, will the center try to incorporate this exceptional accumulation of powers as the new normal after the pandemic? Financial dependence is a part of it. Whether it will use what are called conditionalities to bail out state finances, all these are worries that I am articulating. But when finances are, when powers are accumulated, when they are concentrated, shedding those is even probably more difficult than undoing the lockdown or what's called deconfinement. So there are two processes. One is to let the population loose, and the other is to give back to the states with adequate finances what they need to fulfill their task. The second major point that I wanted to dwell upon is the impact for democracy. Now, there has been no pause in the agenda, the wider agenda of the central government. To think that the rest of it is on hold and this is the main priority, I think the evidence does not support that. The relentless pursuit of other aspects of the anti-democratic agenda under the cover of this state of exception, whether it be the accentuation of social fractures, whether it be curbing of democratic dissent, the right to protest, freedom of expression. I'll give an example of this, what is happening in Hong Kong under the state of exception. All the pro-democracy movement activists are being rounded up, and so easy. They are locked in, they are very easy to find, they're at home, and so they're picked up and put in the lockup, literally. So this kind of thing, I'm sure we are witnessing, we will be witnessing. The second consequence for democracy is that we have the largest fund in the history of Indian democracy in the hands of the ruling party. There are the electoral bonds that we have seen. And from the figures that we have from the PM CARES, this is a major concern for the polity because it's unregulated money power, which is available for all kinds of purposes. Against the background of weakened counterpowers, I don't want to spend time on the judiciary. The media is the one that is a little worrying at the moment. But money, men, material, the Chief Justice said the government has them all. Earlier, the 3 M's used to be money, muscle, and ministerial power. So we are not very far from that. Yeah, so I'm concluding. The concern here, there'll be others, but we can take this up, is how to salvage the positives for governance, both federal and democratic, in the new normal. Because the day after is going to be here very soon. I think the one thing that we should make sure, or the two things that we should make sure are taken forward. One is the healthcare system, the emphasis on the healthcare system, which has suddenly come into the foreground, and with the precondition of a functional multi-level system of governance. And there the Kerala has shown the way. Isaac was mentioning it, the third tier of federalism. Yamini was also talking about it. The focus of these institutions which are in the front line and which can make a difference. Once the spotlight is on them, we should try and see that it is not shifted away to, and this would be something. The last point I would make is about migrant labor. Migrant labor were called guest workers in some countries. and the question of citizenship. They are citizens of India, but they seem to be what Kashmiris are no longer state subjects. The responsibility of the state from which they belong. And so that, as we pursue a path of development on which there are many other issues to be raised, who is responsible for feeding them, for looking after them, and if they are to be sent home, who is responsible for seeing them safely home? I think on that third concern, I'll stop. Thank you. Your voice is gone.
You have to switch off.
Hello, can you hear me?
Now I can.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Arora. That was, I mean, these are very sobering reflections, I have to say. As you mentioned, it's very telling that in today's conference of the chief ministers, only 7 were allowed to speak. It's a bit like being in primary school and being told that only the good boys are allowed or something. So yeah, we are in very challenging times fiscally, and I think nobody knows this more than the Kerala state government, which is right in the firing line at the moment. I think Mr. Vijay has lost the connection again. So I'm going to go to Praveen Jha, if that's all right. Praveen, are you there?
He's in front.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Just go ahead, Praveen. We can hear you.
Am I audible now, please? Can I?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So let me begin by thanking the organizers for including me in this extremely important conversation. And thank you, Chair, for asking me to say my small bit. Now, of course, extremely important foundational issues have been raised, structural, long-term, institutional, etc., which are all extremely important. And while endorsing that, let me just come to some of the basic concerns which are part of this particular session, focusing on those. The first, of course, is that the question of the state of state finances. And in that context, we know that resource mobilization in general is almost in ICU. If we look at, as per the trends available till February 2020, in terms of gross tax revenues of what was in the last budget shown as the revised estimate. In fact, the latest estimates tell us that even that will not be met. Something which was already some 3 lakh crores less than what was budgeted initially, right? From that, we are looking at a figure which is approximately 1 lakh crore less than that, as per the recent estimates. Also, in terms of what was to be shared with states, as per the revised estimates, the figures which were there then in first Feb, out of RE estimate of 6,56,046 crores, it appears that only 5,60,720 crores have been shared with the states as yet. So we already know that there is a huge crisis there, and sort of subsequently, the way things have panned out, it can only become worse. In the current fiscal, of course, it will be, my sense is that possibly a shortfall would be of maybe 25 to 50% of what actually has been sort of shown in the budget. So that's the basic backdrop. And in that context, the question is, what is it that the states can do? And again, in terms of issues which are very much of here and now variety, first, I think states must demand that what has been collected by the center through cess and surcharges, part of that must be shared with the states. At least as a one-shot thing, as an emergency provision. I mean, I think there is just no way, because where are the resources going to come from for the states and so on? So I think that is something which should be very much on the table in the conversation by the finance ministers of the state. Of course, as the chair, you mentioned that provisions with respect to financial easing vis-a-vis the central bank supporting the states. That should certainly be taken into account. States should be allowed to go for borrowing and beyond what has been the limit that has been set. FRBM must be relaxed, at least for the time being. Fresh loans and advances, etc., which can be permitted. If, let's say, just to give one number, if there's a relaxation of, let's say, 0.5% of GDP as fresh loan, etc., in the fiscal deficit, the fiscal deficit, and if it is increased to about 4%, that alone will fetch approximately 1,12,500 crores or so. So these, apart from these, sort of a couple of other small issues which are linked to the Finance Commission recommendations. One, there was a special provision which the Union government has accepted, that revenue gap support for some states. I think it should be sort of at least an emergency kind of intervention right now. It should be applicable to all states. So instead of only a handful of states, it should be certainly made applicable to all states. Likewise, this whole loan repayment and the sort of moratorium or extended kind of moratorium on the we of course have a very frequently raised issue which I think must be considered, and several people have raised it in today's conversation and earlier as well. That is, in the union budget, the provision for capital expenditure, that, you know, large part of that should simply be passed on to the states right now. Apart from, of course, there's this other issue of lots of extremely sort of sort of expenditures which have been marked for things which do not make sense at all in the current context, you know, Central Vista and things like that, and how that money should certainly be used for supporting states. And finally, again, with reference to what the Finance Commission has mentioned, this money which was supposed to be transferred to local bodies without any further delay, I think, through the state exchequers, that money should certainly be, at least 50% of that, you know, should be transferred. So I think these are kinds of provisions which, of course, do not require very long-term kind of or very significant changes in the overall fiscal architecture, etc. But these are things which can be done, provided there is sufficient pressure from the states on the union government, and if that succeeds, without any major hassles. So let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Praveen. Okay, we now have Mr. Vijayanand with us, and we can see him as well. And so could I please request you, sir, to give your initial comments?
Sambi, are you audible? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Let me start off. The first point I want to make is, because the Finance Commission scenario has completely changed, we need a new memorandum of the state for the whole 4 years. Of course, this may not be changed. And because we have to take care of the new spending needs, which are similar in most part of India. One would be the primary health infrastructure, health personnel. Kerala may not gain much through this, but we need to highlight it from a survival angle. Then, of course, the food needs, the social security needs, which are all new. And another important point is the migrant needs, which I don't think has ever been considered by any finance commission. So these are the new realities which need to be assessed by the Finance Commission. And a point I think which was made by Professor Narayana earlier, a new conceptualization of NDRF and SDRF to include these kind of pandemics. And as regards additional resource mobilization, I would fully go. Real mobilization can come only through what the finance minister had suggested, Dr. Isaac, that some kind of pandemic bonds which the Reserve Bank is going to buy. And maybe the old days of deficit financing to some extent, and little bit, and of course the borrowing limit increase, plus taxing the super rich. Coming to the state finances, which is the topic of the day, obviously you can get funds only by realigning and changing the plan. But then you have to really identify a plan which can be cut, that is, which is non-welfare, non-income of ordinary people, non-labor absorption. So agriculture, MSME, and construction in that order. I hear a lot of people say that bring down capital expenditure. But what kind of capital expenditure? I understand that in India, maybe not in Kerala, next to agriculture, construction absorbs most ordinary labor. So that must be very carefully nuanced. In the Kerala context, I would bring the idea of efficiency of expenditure. I'm sure in public works alone, efficiency can bring down the cost by 10 to 20%. So if you look at it, that is again quite possible. New taxes at this point of time may not be very viable, but probably can make a try for excise. But we have now a big advantage, provided Government of India relaxes the ceiling of borrowing. We are now would be a very attractive destination for multilateral and bilateral finance because of the Kerala model. So I think we should use that advantage and push for it. Something which is not very popular in Kerala, we need to touch user charges. And need not be an increase of user charges. That can be like we had during the Bangladesh war, some kind of cess, which is on all user charges. People know that it is for this purpose. Now, coming to the main area of my understanding, the local government finance. The big point I want to make is local government finance are very critical at this point of time. Since Kerala, they are tied to the state plan and the state own source revenue. It is obvious that the local government revenues will shrink. But I need to tell that the local economic stimulus is something which we have not understood. What happens in Attapadi or Wayanad or Vattavada, those kind of remote places, or northern Kasargod, through local government action is not much understood even in Kerala. So we have to be very careful of that. Then within local government finance, what is commonly called in Kerala as escape tax. A lot of people who need to be taxed are not taxed, including property, profession, and my understanding, not totally impressionistic, it's about 40%. So you can almost 40 to 60%. So you can almost increase by doing what is called a tax mapping, a rigorous collection. And I would personally suggest, not as SFC chairman, the concept of some authority, now a lot of officers from the commercial taxes department, to find out whether the assessment has been done as per the local government decision. If not, just tip them off. Some kind of a concurrent audit kind of thing of tax audit is required because collection is extremely poor. Another area where local governments in Kerala, particularly Gram Panchayats, can do is MGNREGS. I'm sure MGNREGS is not going to be cut in the next 2-3 years. There will be some problems, but now they can't afford to cut. So efficiency of MGNREGS expenditure so that it can substitute much of agricultural investment. It's easily done. Then during the second finance commission headed by Dr. Prabhat Patnaik, we had suggested that automatically grade many of the local government user charges and taxes to the money value. It is agreed upon but not legislated. It will of course be challenged in the court, but it may stand in good stead because many local government taxes and user charges and rents and others have not been revised for more than maybe 2 decades. Then there are unutilized taxes, advertisement tax and a tax which was wrongly named at that point of time called service tax, which is only a betterment tax as a percentage of the property tax. This can easily be this thing, and now this is the right time because people know there is no resource and some resource for COVID combating would be in order. Then my special request to the finance minister, there is a lot of confusion on entertainment tax. I was there in the as a witness in the constitutional, that committee under Ahluwalia, thanks to Mr. Manishankar Iyer, the local government taxes were excluded. And in Kerala, entertainment tax is a local government tax. Unfortunately, the tax has come down very sharply, and now it's 8% which government gets, and local governments have lost heavily to the tune of about 100 crores in 2 years. So we need to look at it. We probably restore it in a, it requires legal thing. And another thing is the Kerala government, local government development fund, which was legislated by the previous LDF government to create a fund, not exactly like KIFBI. You can afford tax-free infrastructure bonds for local governments, and it can be either through revenue raising by the project or escrowing by some local government revenue, or government standing annuity, so that current capital expenditure needs can be met, so that in future you can pay for it. And the next point I want to tell, in Kerala, particularly in agriculture and allied sectors, social sectors, the government spends a lot of money, and the panchayat also spends a lot of money, the local governments. If we prepare a single plan at the local government, not that government will prepare its plan, the local government will prepare its plan, but to the people, it's a single plan that will have a lot of efficiency gains. So the farmer knows how much they get in a local government, not separately. So that kind of planning also will increase. Then again, it's much more in local government than state government. Just by efficiency enhancement, we can save 15 to 20%. Local government spend about, this year with reduced plan, could be around 15,000 crore in all, and they can do this. And under the centrally sponsored schemes, we have to particularly concentrate on pulling funds which are in the project mode, like Amarit Smart City. They will all undergo cuts, but we have to do that. And the last point I want to do, it's a general point, not only for local governments, is that some kind of, Yamin Iyer is an expert on that, budget transparency and accountability. The money collected goes for COVID or whatever purpose we have claimed. If that is done, probably response will be more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vijayanand. That was also very useful, lots of practical suggestions. Sushil, are you there? Sushil, can I request?
Yeah, Sushil Khanna sir's connection is fine, ma'am.
Okay, great. Sushil, can you?
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Let me just, I've been, thank you for inviting me. I've really enjoyed the day and learned many new things and some more things, but let me just highlight one or two things. We are discussing a health emergency, and we are talking that we as a country and some states do not spend enough on health, and maybe this needs a boost. Kerala is an exception, an outlier. But I think the way the whole thing has been handled, it has become an economic emergency. It has become the economic cost far more than the health cost that we are discussing about 1 or 2 or 3% of GDP. Okay, and a lot of this is what Professor Arora was calling governance. I think if you compare how other countries have done lockdown, how we have gone about doing it, it has multiplied the cost. People have just abandoned trucks on highways, and I know of companies who are still trying to trace 190 trucks where they were abandoned, and stuff like that. So there is a disruption. You cannot get food on the highways because you unthinkingly do this. This did not happen in the United States. This did not happen overnight. In South Africa, which has large amount of migrant workers, and migrants were given 3 days to go back to their villages and so on and so forth. So by doing a sudden thing, by giving new orders every day, first saying only trucks carrying essential commodities will move, then saying all trucks will move. By the time in 3 days, people have abandoned and run away. So there is an entire disruption. There is a sharp fall in consumption levels of people, which we heard about earlier. Some people have talked about 40% decline in consumption. And there's going to be a widespread hunger now. Okay. And if what Shridipto Mandal was saying, those estimates are correct, 15-20% contraction in the economy, we are looking at a very large economic disaster facing us, which the bulk of which will be confronted by the state governments. That means state governments will have to provide bailout. Okay, firstly, people who are hungry, people who have been thrown out of jobs, small industries which have been decimated in this case. They were earlier decimated by demonetization, but now again, this is even worse than what happened at that point of time. Okay, and the collapse of revenues. I think Isaac mentioned that he has got only 250 crores out of 2,500 he was expecting, and the finance minister of Delhi mentioned 350 crores out of 3,500 he was supposed to get this month. Okay, so the state governments are looking at 90% collapse of in the short run revenue. So Praveen's estimates are very optimistic. Okay, we are going to see a very sharp fall also in central government's finances. GST, when states have lost, it means central government has lost also 90% of its revenues. Okay, so it only means that we have to move into financial markets, we have to borrow, and that's what Jayati began by saying, that the role of the central bank is crucial to the whole thing, propping up these markets. India has a very narrow bond market. There has been a big collapse last week. If some of you are following of Franklin Templeton, a bond trader, a mutual fund, and today morning, the RBI has put 50,000 crores to banks to bail out other funds like that. They haven't put 50,000 crores to bail out state governments. I just want to emphasize this point. Not even 50,000 crores. State governments need something like 5 lakh crores. Okay, at this point of time, if they have to intervene. So a day ago, yesterday or day before yesterday, there is a long piece in Wall Street Journal on the US banks not actually helping Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve has now moved, as Jyoti was saying, into the buying the bonds of the state government, local states, and also corporate bonds, because the banks are not buying it. So to prevent the collapse of those markets, they are right into the bond market. The central bank is doing it directly, because in this case, and in our case, the central bank is saying the money I'm giving to the banks, they are putting it back with me. That's why the reverse repo rate was cut to what is called lazy banking. But that is also a governance issue. The way this government has frightened the bankers, out of their wits, and filed all kinds of cases on all kinds of people, what were sometimes genuine lending risks. That any company which fails, that means there is some banker has helped somebody to siphon off money. That seems to be the thing. So you have really destroyed fragile. You have made the whole financial sector very fragile. It means your ability, our ability, KIFBI and other institutions' ability to borrow is also under pressure at this point. I just want to emphasize that. Interest rates may come down only if Federal Reserve, if the central bank, RBI actually intervenes to put money to support the bonds being floated by the state governments or paper being floated by the state governments. So we are looking at very new needs of the state government, not COVID, not health. That I take for granted, that they will be there. And even if they spend under 1% of GDP, which is impossible for them to do it, because they do 1.5% of GDP, even if they spend one more, we are talking of 10-20% would be needed in social sector to prevent widespread hunger, to prevent deaths, to prevent dissemination of small industries. States have very little leeway in the financial markets, financial sector. It's entirely a central prerogative. They control the banks. They can do what they like. They can threaten the banks to lend on their behalf here and there, as the finance minister was doing a little while ago. But the states have no leeway at all. If they want to help their small industries, they don't even, their state financial corporations have all been decimated. They're almost finished. Kerala is again an exception there. But by and large, it's all gone. And even there, the sizes are very small, because funding for these institutions, they're not a bank, so they can't borrow from depositors. So the funding of these institutions, the ability to help small industry has been destroyed by Congress government also. I'm not blaming this government. For a long time, the whole new liberal policies since the 90s have really decided that the state should not be doing all these things and the private banks will do all this. So I think we should also look at non-health and social needs things. We are looking at collapse of GDP. I am a little surprised as the numbers Sudipto is putting out. Even if there's a 5 to 7% contraction in GDP, we are going to see a much sharper contraction in the revenues of both central and state governments. And there is no other option but to expand deficit, financing, monetize deficit, and let the banks banks pick up part of the bonds that the states will have to this thing. Okay, this is going to be an unprecedented activity. Inflation, I don't think we have to worry because there is a collapse of capacity utilization, which was already 60-70%. It has now fallen another 30%. Okay, so except for pharmaceutical companies and some very small people who are producing, even FMCG companies are not able to produce and move goods. If you're talking to people, why there are shelves are empty in mom and pop stores or banya shops are empty? Because goods are not arriving, because those companies are unable to produce and ship goods at this point of time. So this is an entirely mismanagement. It hasn't happened like in the United States. I'm currently teaching a course in University of Washington, Seattle. Some of my people who are in the course, many of course working from home, but many, like even Boeing, the production is on. Okay, Boeing is not selling any planes, but people who have to produce what they consider important and strategic goods are allowed to travel, go to work on the shop floor. So if you think of mindless shutting down and not allow any leeway to state governments to manage it, so we are looking at a very severe economic crisis. I would like to argue what began as a health crisis has become into a full-blown economic crisis, partly because the Home Ministry which interfered into all this. They were giving orders, trucks will move or not move. And of course, as Professor Rao said, the Finance Ministry seems to be entirely paralyzed. It doesn't have any ideas. It talks about giving 500 rupees to somebody here and there. That is the kind of speech our Finance Minister gives. Okay, so I think we are in for a long haul. And the states, unless they combine together to ask for it, unless the we are going to see large-scale hunger, which we haven't seen since the mid-60s. This is my estimation. With this, I will wait for coming back later.
Thank you very much, Sushil. Very depressing, but also very insightful points. And we have a discussant, John Samuel. I'm very
No, audio is not working. It's that the mic has problem. That we have been trying from morning onwards.
I see. Okay. So in that case,
speaker working mic.
While we are waiting for them, I'm just going to go back then for some quick second round for all of you who have spoken already, and also in case Isaac has any questions. But one thing that struck me, and I think, I mean, in a sense, everyone's been alluding to this, but the enormity of what is happening. I think we have to remember this. Sushil also alluded to this. And in the morning, of course, Sudipto gave very horrific numbers. He said something like 30% decline for this quarter and 17% overall for the year. We are talking about very, very dramatic collapses, which requires very, very large interventions. So, so there is no option but monetize deficit. Whatever you say, whichever way you look at it, yes, you can raise some taxes here and some taxes there and some wealth tax and this and that. As the IRS people have also suggested various taxes, this is not going to be enough. We are really talking about the need for fiscal stimuli of at minimum 7 to 10% of GDP, which is not even the average of what is happening in the rest of the world. Across the world, from developing to developed countries, it's between 5 to 20% of GDP is the kind of fiscal stimulus package that is being given. So at least 5%, I would say 7% is the kind of expansion we're thinking of which let us assume around 5% of it immediately will have to be monetized. Now, perhaps it is a good idea then for a gathering like this, for all of us to think about, if we do this, how can we do this in a way that ensures that the states also get a decent share of it? I think Yamini had some good ideas. Use some of the existing schemes to multiply the amounts that you're giving, but not small amounts. We're talking about now quadrupling 5 times increase in many of these things, whether it is food security or it is LGA or any of these things. So that in itself, if we use those available schemes, that already spreads a lot of the money out in reasonably equitable ways. But then second, of course, we basically get the RBI to buy up all the state government bonds openly, and pretty much all other debt as well. There is a strong precedent for it. The US Federal Reserve apparently has already bought up every available debt, including student debt, consumer debt. So it's now holding, in the last few months, only 35% of GDP they have spent on buying up this kind of debt. ECB is doing something similar. So it can be done. If a gathering like this wants to suggest some proposals, what do you think are the kinds of things that we can do along these lines for very, very large increases in spending? Because there's no point in asking for little small changes. Another 100 crore here. I think Sushil also mentioned this. 200 crore here, 500 crore here. It's not going to be enough. You really need very, very large increases to confront the scale of the challenge that there is.
So I am against putting more money in any central sponsored schemes, multiplying it 5 times or 3 times or anything like that. You have to give directly to state governments, okay, and let them handle the crisis, because every state, this varies from state to state, okay. Some people their migrants are returning, and there are other states where different kinds of problems are arising, okay. So, and we are looking at least 5 lakh crores just for states, I would say, minimum kind of numbers when you are looking at it. Okay, if you can give 50,000 crores to just debt mutual funds in one morning, I don't think 5 lakh crores to all the states is a large amount. It's just the beginning of it. You will see a lot more than that, okay, at this point of time. And obviously, because the banks will not buy, they are not, central bank has given them money to fund NBFCs, they are not paying it. They are not funding it. Nobody wants to touch anybody else, because my debt will go bad and you'll have CBI behind me. So let the federal bank directly buy it. Okay. Our banks already carry enough government paper. So unless the RBI forces them to hold it, or RBI directly holds it, they are not going to buy any more state bank bonds. Okay, let us all be clear that they have exhausted those limits which they were talking about. So at this point of time, I don't think this is a time to add a little bit here and there. Please add some more taxes. I have no quarrel with some cess here or some taxes from rich households in Kerala for local government. Please do all that kind of thing. They will not really solve the problem. We are looking at a really large leeway. Okay, the state finance ministers know more than what they were expected to get April, because now their production has collapsed. People are without jobs and they need aid here at this point of time. Okay, what Isaac was getting, 2,500 was enough to pay salaries and small capital expenditure and stuff like that. We are looking at much larger numbers at this point of time, and hence I am not in favor of centrally sponsored scheme being multiplied. I am thinking of direct funding to states, and we must put forward this demand. State governments have to put forward this demand. From morning we are hearing, okay, I was only disappointed that though many finance ministers, including Mr. Badal, came, many did not come. Okay, despite, I'm sure Dr. Thomas Isaac made efforts to woo everybody to join into this effort. Coming together to press for your states, coming for state finances is a very important part of it. Professor Arora has already mentioned how states have been undermined, their autonomy has been undermined. I don't want to get into it. We have to fight back. Some states have to fight back at that one level. That's all I can say.
Thanks, Sushil. I wonder what Yamini wants to come in on this. Okay, Sushil, I agree with you. Lots of money going to state governments, certainly. But also, the Food Security Act, the employment guarantee, these are centrally sponsored schemes. These have to be dramatically enlarged. Also, I don't think the two are contradictory. I'm just checking if Yamini wants to come in on this.
Sorry, I'm going to keep my video off because the connectivity is a little low. I did want to say, so I think we have to think about this in terms of what systems are already in place, what systems are working well, which need to be enhanced because we are dealing with an emergency situation, and what systems we need to put in place to be able to ensure that the response is as responsive to state-specific contexts. And it's in that context where I think with NREJ, with the National Food Security Act, there is already a very robust, well-functioning, with lots of challenges, no doubt, but relatively well-functioning architecture that's in place. That architecture needs to be fully supported, strengthened, and enhanced significantly in order to ensure that we are dealing with the current crises of hunger, and at this point, adding anything new is not going to be helpful. However, having said that, I also agree that a centrally sponsored scheme, kind of centralized mechanism, is not the most appropriate. Therefore, I am arguing for bundling up the existing schemes, which are actually over 600, 700 in number, into untied grants that states can then use. Even if you take out NREGA and PDS, you still have a substantive amount of centrally sponsored schemes, existing budgets that can be repurposed in order to be able to enhance what states need to provide appropriate social security to people that are in need. So what I'm arguing for is certainly not more centralization. I am arguing for a very deeply federal architecture for the provision of social protection, keeping two key pillars that states have effectively utilized to be able to provide basic social protection to their people. So that's the argument, and I completely understand the importance of responding. However we enhance the financing, it has to be responsive to the nature of the pandemic and the nature of the economic consequences that it places, which is going to vary state by state, which is why an interstate council arrangement, a space for a serious fora for deliberation to arrive at a consensus formula that is responsive and agile enough to change as the outbreaks itself change is important. I would like to take the opportunity to add one more point here on local governments that I think hasn't been brought up. As Mr. Vijayanand sir said, and many others have articulated the centrality of local governments in responding to COVID-19, and hopefully that this is the re-emergence of the local governments back into the debate on fiscal federalism. But if you look at the 15th Finance Commission report, the interim report, it is breaking up the financing it's giving to rural local bodies as well as urban local bodies into a basic grant and 50% to a tied grant, and that tied grant is linked to water, sanitation, open defecation free, etc. This is not the time, although these might be important goals, this is not the time to tie down local government funding. And I would urge that the 15th Finance Commission, as it sits down to redeliberate, also looks at converting these tied funds into untied funds so that local governments are in the position to draw on finances that they need to be able to provide the kind of localized response that is necessary to deal with the with COVID-19 and both the economic and health pressures it places on it.
Thank you so much, Amini. But of course, the issue of the political viability of all this is a big one. And what Professor Balveer Arora told us is essentially that it's not viable at the moment. In other words, that the political economy of India today is one where you have a very centralizing government, which is doing everything possible it can legally and otherwise to further entrench its power. So in a sense, what I'm asking you, Professor Arora, is what are the chances for state governments who are trying to develop a more federalist cooperative structure? What are the ways in which this could be even attempted?
No, I didn't mean to say that all is lost, that this is not something that one can fight back against. I was just pointing to the difficulties that one must not underestimate one's opponent. And so that was my purpose. But I'm fully in agreement with much of what was said with regard to mobilizing support and pressing, and again pressing, like the WHO says, testing. I think we need to continue to strive for this. Yamini made some excellent points. This interim Finance Commission report, if we are able to press for a review on many points and then try to work through that, would at least have the parliamentary route legitimacy. Otherwise, what I fear is that if things can be kept outside the constitution, things can be kept outside parliament, things can be kept outside the accountability channels, the tendency I have seen is to go for that route. The second thing is that we have to be prepared for some amount of political distancing. The center will try to distance itself from places where things are not that good, or will try to paint them in that light. This political distancing of trying to shed wield power and not own responsibility is the second thing. Now, it's important to understand the type of people who are wielding power. And I still would hold that finance ministers should get together, states should get together and continue to press, but it's a long haul.
Okay, thank you. At least it wasn't as depressing as the first one. I see that John, we've got John Samuel back, I think. John, are you there?
He's
Not
back.
that.
Yes. Now
Yeah.
please go ahead.
Video
Please, John. Yeah.
Audio,
It's not
only audio.
on the camera because the data is very weak.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Just go ahead and speak.
Yeah, I tend to agree with most of the points raised here. Particularly, I am in agreement with what Praveen just said and, Vijayanand said. I see it from 3 points. One is definitely the issue which has been said. When you really look from a fiscal point of view, we don't get any clue about what the union government is going to do. To be honest, this is very surprising because almost all the states are facing a serious, public finance crisis, and there is nothing which we got from the central government. As far as the state governments are concerned, the situation in different parts are very different. Let me take the case of Kerala. Kerala has actually a triple problem. One is, as you know, that our service sector, service sector is one of the biggest. It's going to affect because the remittance is going to be very much reduced. Actually, very significant reduction of remittance would affect our, tax in many ways. The real estate, every sector. So that will have also an implication for the lives and livelihood of the people, apart from the government. Then, other states are very different. So the two kinds of things which need to be done. One is all the state finance ministers. So this is a congratulation to Thomas Isaac to bring together at least finance ministers. There's a need to finance ministers and the states joining together, because this is the only, at the moment what is happening is we are in a very catch-22 positions. We do not know what the central government is going to do. So hence, all the state government, at least the non-BJP state governments, will have to come together to pressurize the government to have a very, very significant new fiscal package. This also means lifting FRBM, Reserve Bank permission for bonds, or lots of stuff. And this needs to be done in utmost earnest advocacy at that point in time. Then the second thing is, how do we leverage our own existing resources, whatever resources which we have. This Yes, I agree with Vijayanand. There is a lot of scope for financial efficiency. So we need to really look at it. How do we manage deficit? That is the first thing I said. And this deficit management, none of the states can, in this present context, manage it unless there is a concerted effort and support from the union government. The second thing is how do you refinancing strategy? And refinancing strategy will have to be there. And this will have to be not only from the union government, but also each of the state government will have to have strategy. Then, of course, expenditure management. Refinancing strategy, I think we need to see that Isaac may know the NRIs are in a set of paradox, but also there is a very significant amount of money which is in the bank, which is we get very, very less what you call interest rate. You know, as an NRI, I get hardly 4% or less than 4%. Our treasuries gives 8% interest rate to the employees. So even if we have a special permission within the Kerala, we have a special bond for 3 to 5 years. I think one of the strategy for Kerala could be we could raise a substantial amount of money from NRIs both ways. One is to fund the public finance deficit to some extent, but also to have a very strategic, what I call an investment plan. These things, two things are important for Kerala. As far as the Finance Commission is concerned, of course, we need to see it from two angles. The ideal thing is terms of reference will have to be redefined. Finance commissions will have to be responsible for the fiscal relation. But my sense is the BJP government at the center would use this financial crisis as a means to extend a sort of financial emergency, which will be a proxy political emergency. That is my biggest fear. As of now, it is not. I don't think that they don't have a clue. Actually, they are not. They have a game plan. They are actually making it as a political point. So we need to be very, very careful. Belvir Arora said about it. I think, we are moving into a police raj. There is, like what happened in Thailand and many other places, there could be restriction on media. There could be restriction on nude media. So, one hand, we need to be extremely careful about the democratic deficit which may happen. So, that we need to be. And then, even government of Kerala, I think Kerala to large extent, we are far better in terms of financial transparency and accountability, and also local governance finance. So, Kerala could set an example to have a white paper very clearly, taking everybody into confidence and have a collective strategy. Once that is being done, the Kerala model, which we have to have very clear demand from the center, which needs to be used to mobilize at least certain state government, because unless we do it, I don't think the present condition, the finance ministry of the union government will do any wonders. They are sitting on the fence. I also think the strategy is being planned elsewhere rather than the finance ministry. So that's a very, very serious concern which I have. So I am in largely agreement with almost all the points which you said. But I also feel that every state government have to have their own separate strategy, but they also need to have a joint strategy. And that joint strategy is a must. And that has to be a political and policy strategy, because unless we do that, the central government may take many states, including government of Kerala, for a ride. So that I have very less confidence there. So far, I don't think that Isaac, they don't have a clue. Actually, politically, they have very good strategic team to with the crony capitalism, to push their agenda, to delegitimize opposition parties. So hence, opposition parties will have to be coming together. That's my point. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much, John. We have already gone beyond our time, and it's true we had a bit of difficulty starting, but perhaps I could ask for final closing comments from all the participants. Praveen, would you like to begin? Because I think you wanted to say something at some point.
Yes. I hope I'm laudable.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Given the scale of the problem, obviously what Chair you have been saying and others have said, that a big crisis obviously needs a big bang kind of response. However, what is also clear to me is that there is huge resistance to that big bang approach from the central government. And hence it's important to mobilize almost everything which can be done under the circumstances without giving up on the hope of the big bang. Right, so demonetization is absolutely necessary. Central bank sort of supporting states.
Not demonetization, monetized deficit.
Sorry, monetization of.
Deficit.
No. Sorry. I was saying demonetization of debt.
Monetization.
Yeah, sorry. So that basically, sorry that I've kind of been impacted so much by demonetization that yeah. So all those supports are, extremely important. But I'm saying that in a situation of this kind, all hands have to be on the deck. So I mean, there is no way that one can sort of not think of whatever are the small measures that they might add up. So, for instance, possibility of surcharges within the domain of the states, whatever powers that the states have, all those taxes which can give resources to the states right now. So, those transactions should be eased. I mean, alcohol, etc., for instance. And so I think, these things. And the final point, I mean, apart from a lot of, if that happens, a lot of money flowing through the state exchequer from the center and so on. But I think given the economic vulnerability of special categories and groups, what you were emphasizing following on Yamini's arguments, that the chair, that, special programs, etc. Now, those have to be prioritized. I mean, I don't see how that cannot be very much on the front burner. So, very briefly, I thought that, some of these issues, along with looking at the big picture, that we must emphasize.
Thank you very much, Praveen. Mr. Vijayanand, would you like to make some closing remarks?
Yes, just one clarification. Kerala local governments have their own revenue of 2,000 crores now. With just some efficiency, we can raise it to 3,000 crores, but not immediately next 4 or 5 months because they are going for elections. But two other points not related to this. One, after this, all of you are very influential and you have a lot of influential friends. If you bring primary health care on the agenda, I'm sure funds will flow. They all want votes and people know the importance of primary health care, not only in India, even in rural parts and much. The second important point, for the first time ever, the migrant issue has been brought to the forefront. Ordinary politicians have realized it. Panchayats have realized it. I was in a lot of webinar with Central Indian Panchayats. They all know the importance. So we have an old forgotten act called Interstate Migrant Workmen Act, is 1979, which is now being unnoticed and subsumed into the labor code. This is the time to realize the rights of migrants, and we have a lot of experience in the last 40 years on rights-based legislation, whether it be of people with disabilities or mental health care or juvenile justice. With that experience, we should all try for some justice to the migrants. That's more on a sustainable long-term basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else would like to make any final comments? Sheel?
I think Vijay Anand made a very important point which he did not raise in his summary. We have to give a new memorandum to Finance Commission. Okay, this came out in the earlier session also. There's no point in pleading to this government and finance minister and stuff like that. Okay, It will be easier to talk to people who are professionals, even if they are appointed by this government. So this is the time all state government should ask. Situation has changed. May take 3 months more, but give us chance to ask for a total change in the situation. Basically, increase our borrowings and stuff like that. So this is as a strategy, more than inter-state council, a new memorandum where all the state government demand is the tax. And I think Vijay made it earlier point, but he forgot about it in the session. Right?
Actually, that's a very important point. Okay, finally, Yamini and Professor Aurora, any final points?
I think Yamini said she had to go.
She has left. She has left.
Yeah. So, I'll just say one thing. Yeah, no, that of all the sciences that we know of, I think futurology is being the biggest casualty. So we were doing Vision 2025, Vision 2050. I think we're not able to see clearly 2020. So I think we have to become a little modest. And I said, Jayati and Professor Khanna also said that we are living through a historic time. It's difficult to take a measure of all that can happen, and one should try to ward off the worst. I think in that we might get a better deal. I saw Dr. Isaac wanting to say something, so can I point him to you?
Great, wonderful. Isaac, please.
Mike?
Okay. See, we didn't have the inaugural session because there was the CM's meeting going on with the PM. But then Chief Minister will be speaking now. I was supposed to chair that, therefore I will now speak now and then CM speak. Most important take from our deliberations today has been the enormity of economic collapse. I mean, because the most pessimistic estimate so far on India by UN, every IMF, or the with different financial agencies, it has not gone to minus. It stayed at 0. Then comes Sudipta, who says the present quarter it will be 30% minus, which is comparable to the estimates made for US and Britain and so on, most of the countries, and therefore should not surprise us. And over the year it will be minus 15, 16, you are saying. So it's a virtual economic collapse. I think the policymakers in the country do not understand the gravity of the situations. 2, I think there was a near unanimity that this can be resolved only by large-scale monetization of the debt. Jyoti, you said 5%. Yeah, give or take 1 or 2%, but that's the scale of operation. Third, there is a definite unanimity that it has to be passed to the state, not center operating through centrally sponsored and so on. The state governments, the finance ministers' meetings, one on revenue now would be for the current 10%, even less than 10% of what is budgeted, and center devolution is coming down, and GST compensation they are just refusing to budge, and so there is just no money. I don't think ever in the financial history governments have faced this situation. My ministry is not working that way. There is nothing to work. There is no money coming in except giving the checks to whatever that has been borrowed. So this is a situation. Therefore, state governments have to be helped. And how this package of state governments? 1, FRBM limit has to be raised. 5 is the number which was most people said. Second, central devolution is coming down, and therefore I think the idea that is being floated was that rather than the finance ministry deciding what to give, President should give the Finance Commission additional terms of reference in the background of the COVID, how an additional grant and what should be the size that should be given to the states. Because they have this revenue deficit grants scheme, but now situation has changed so much. Even for the current year report, they could very well make a recommendation. So we would like to go by the Finance Commission route. And then GST compensation must be paid. That's a solemn promise of law. And if they refuse to do that, I think we'll have no choice other than going to the Supreme Court. I hope some other states will join Kerala. And then, and finally, I'm not writing off all centrally sponsored schemes. The NREG expand it to 150 days of employment and increase another 50 rupees and give half the last year's earnings as advance. Yeah? And you recoup it during the course of the year. You are giving additional 50 rupees wages. So that is something, I think the most needy people will be getting something like 3,000, 4,000 rupees into the budget, you see. So income transfer. So this is one. Second, this is time to introduce universal pension here. Already the pension is paltry 200 rupees here. Make it respectable. 500 or 600. Of course, Kerala gives 1,300. And also NHM. But NHM, this silly way of having 2,000 budget heads, Yamini said, is crazy. Look at this idiocy of coming to Kerala and telling how you should handle your health sector, what should be spent on each, and so on. They should have some sense of proportion. You see, before they thought of anything of a national health program and so on, here was a state which was spending so much on health. Give some freedom for that. So remove all these ties and so on and triple or 4 times because it has a meaning. The money has to go into health. Okay, this is the kind of program. But then also there was discussion regarding that income transfer, how it should take place. There was also discussion regarding small-scale industries and farmers, how what is to be done with them, and so on. And John's statement that we have to look at what is happening in Kerala as a white paper and so on. But, it's not a statement. You don't know what is the emerging situation to say anything definite. Kerala government has appointed 2 committees, therefore. The planning board is going to look into the impact of COVID in the economy. Kerala is going to be much more tougher thing. 33% of our equivalent to that GSDP comes from remittance. Remittance constitutes that big. And already estimates are 5 lakh people are going to return. There may be a 25% shortfall in the remittances. And with its reverse multiplier impact, you just don't say this much will be less. The impact is going to be much bigger. And therefore, this committee is studying that. And GIFT has been given the task of looking at the impact of all this on the state revenue. Then we will see what's to be done. But now there is a challenge I am proposing to you. Today's morning also brought out a sudden fear. This is a calamity taking place. Why is the central government not doing anything? Nothing here. What is the thing they have given to states? 15,000 crores of rupees on a health package, only half of which will be distributed this year, over the next 3 years. As if something great is being done. So is there something that means more than meets the eye? That was the issue that suddenly cropped up in the morning discussion. Is it somebody deliberately pushing it to a mess so that there's a financial emergency declared? Given the COVID pandemic, etc., no political opposition, etc., will be timid. People will be more worried about other things than your democratic rights and so on and so forth. And therefore, it's important that a platform emerge in India, laying out what is to be done. Within these few hours of discussions, certain contours of a program did emerge for the state package, MSME and the farmers package, an income transfer package and so on, add on to it, 150-point program or 100-program. It can be finalized through continuing these discussions in other ways, so that there is a platform on which we rally whatever the little bit of thinking economists and social scientists in India. Every concerned intellectual to be signing, yes, there is a way out. This is a way out. And in the morning, there was this important discussion where Yechuri, Jairam Ramesh, and D. Raja were there. There it was agreed upon the point just you made, that is important. The states, and more before the states, the political parties in India, hey, do they have a program? Or you accept whatever the Prime Minister every occasion gives a bharshan or gives us a package? Do you have a program? What is to be done? See, every finance minister in India has written independently almost the same thing to the just yesterday, Punjab finance minister copied his letter to PM to us. Okay, we have sent similar, but endorsed it. And our CM is writing to the PM. So every finance minister, every chief minister is writing. But why is it not possible to come together on a platform stating the same thing? Nothing additional is required. The political parties also, so that there is something, not basic fundamental alternatives for India and so on, but for this pandemic handling. So I think a take home from our discussions tomorrow also included would be, one, we evolve a kind of broad platform program where every thinking concerned Indian should join in, who believes that things should not allow to drift to the manner in which is going into a disaster. I don't know where it's going to end up. And I hope the political leaders who are here will follow up what they said. And I think this is very, very important. And I know Sushil said people should have come. I don't want to now spoil the chances of future broad platform by opening up my frustrations, why it has not taken place. That's okay. In politics, things happen like that. But I think a good beginning has been made. And just two more points. Vijayant, I thought, would elaborate more on the role being played by local governments in Kerala, in this magnificent show they're putting out. It's not just, it's a multi-level planning that is taking place. The chief minister, his committees, daily briefings at the top. And then you have at the local level, the panchayats, the municipalities. They are in charge. They are organizing kitchens. They are organizing, monitoring the migrant workers. They are going to implement reverse quarantine in Kerala. And innovation, not taking down what is said from above here. I went to a panchayat yesterday where they had this a hotspot. So now they're opening up. So panchayat has decreed everybody can walk only with an umbrella, where night or day. Now, two umbrellas you hold, you'll be 1 meter away from each other. No? And okay, Kerala monsoon is coming, everybody has to buy an umbrella. So Panjay said, buy big umbrella. We will subsidize that so that you all, nobody should walk outside the house without an umbrella. Okay, with a mask and umbrella. I mean, these are little things, but it shows the involvement in a sense of ownership of what is being done at the below. See, there have been moments when you think the People's Planning Campaign that we undertook 25 years back was, you always wonder, was it, we didn't reach those dreams and so on. So many people think it was rusted and so on. But something which we never discussed in the People's Planning or Decentralization process in Kerala, disaster management. Now suddenly Kerala realizes this is very, very important, disaster management. So much so every panchayat in Kerala is preparing disaster management plan. It was while that plan was being prepared, the COVID came. Okay. And I think all over India, in the recommendation, but I don't know who may said that the Finance Commission least they can do is remove these basic and conditional grants. Give it. Let them do what they want with that. You see, I tell you, Panchayat will be forced because they are near the people. They have to face the people on a day-to-day basis. They will respond to this COVID year. They will respond to hunger much better than state machinery. Therefore, just give it. That was one point that did come up. And I don't want to elaborate on second, the health. Look at the states which are performing better. Kerala, Tamil Nadu, it will perform better. Rajasthan, which have better public health system. That's a common denominator for the states which are performing better. The importance of public health system in India. So all this can form a broad anti-COVID program, which I think in Jayadi or some people, you people say sitting there should take initiative. So we are very grateful for you to having spared the time and being here. And I know this impact of this conference will be much larger than interaction, dialogue between us. Lots of people have been coming in, watching. Lots of people have been sending messages. We wanted the text and so on and so forth. So I want to thank each one of you. It was a very good conversation. And I hope we will continue. So Jyoti, take leadership. Thank you.
Isaac, inspiring as always. Thank you. That was a terrific end to a very, very fascinating and very useful day. So, thanks.
And Sushil was so passionate, yeah? Yeah.
Okay, I think
I don't have
another session.
No, Safi, just continue. I am not going to give any chair address. Chief Minister
But
from the office.
We have some 70 questions. Would you like to?
After Chief Minister.
Okay. So, thank you. I think it's done. I think it's a great day. I think we are going to have the final, So, thank you for being with us. We had a long day, and all of you will agree that we had a very exciting deliberations. That in turn induced you to raise so many questions. And all these questions are very relevant questions, and some of the questions for which very ready-made answers are not available. But nonetheless, we appreciate the fact that you took this business very seriously. That's why you took the pain to raise these questions. So I think we will raise some of the questions, and Professor Thomas Isaac, there are some questions specifically addressed to him. I don't think that he will be kind of inclined to answer questions which are raised to other scholars. So there is one question, comment by one of the participants, Dr. Sri Dev Sahayam. How did state democratize and decentralize the crowd disaster at the beginning, and how did it yield the result? In short, what exactly is the Kerala model, perhaps, of containing containing the COVID pandemic? Well, yeah.
Yes, my responses will be brief, so that we spend a half an hour address as many questions as possible. I have already discussed this when I described the role the local governments have been playing in the the COVID mitigation efforts at the local level. So the democratization has been primarily through a democratic polity at the local level. A democratic polity which goes beyond formal representation. There are so many informal associations of people and associations of people, non-statal associations of people like palliative groups, various voluntary groups, nutritional groups, and so on, who are linked to local governments. And it is through this agency this democratization has taken place. I won't describe what exactly Kerala did, but primarily it had a good public health system, and therefore we were prepared. we could do what was described, aggressive testing, tracing, and treating those who are found positive again and again, so till the chain is broken. So this is what we did, and we were helped in this process by local governments. So local governments played an important role to have total cooperation of the people for the program. So that's all that I will respond now. Yeah. You can take on summary.
Yeah,
take it.
Okay, this is a question which I think I'm sure this is a question by some students, scholars from the university or college. Sir, printing currency, this is Reshma Rajivan. Yeah, I think Reshma Rajivan is, yeah, she's from Kerala University, right? Sir, printing currency she has got Indian Economic Service now. Printing currency can never be a viable option either in the short run or in the long run. Ultimately, it may take the economy to a situation of hyperinflation. Yeah.
It's this was what we used to do till early 1990s, right from independence period. Macroeconomic terms, there is no difference between monetizing the debt or borrowing from the markets. So now the present situation is, even Rangarajan, who was responsible for stopping this practice of deficit financing and forcing the state and center to borrow from the market so that they are under the market discipline, he himself is now advocating that in the present context there is nothing you can do other than borrow from the Reserve Bank, because the calamity, the proportion is so big, something like a 15% reduction, shrinkage in the economy. Now with such collapse, additional money is not going to result in any inflation. There's total collapse of demand. So it's only proper demand is not going to result in inflation. If there is inflation, you just have to do only one thing. You remove the tax on petrol. Petrol, diesel prices, fuel prices will come down. That will keep the inflation rate low. Now you have also large stock of food grain. So food inflation also will be very limited. Now there is no option other than this. What else do you do? Are you going to tax people and raise money now? You can tax people only if there is some sale or income taking place here. Therefore, increase in taxation is not a method. You borrow from the banks. Banks are too afraid to lend. Kerala went with a 6,000 crore packet for 15-year bond. The rate was 8.9. Can any government afford to pay this rate of interest? And Reserve Bank has informally told Kerala, our government, to go slow. The market is unsettled. I don't know what. The market is freezing. So there's an economic collapse taking place. This is the only way to salvage the economy. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. This looks like this Freddie K. Tharath. Will it not be wise to orient fiscal federalism to facilitate organizing cooperatives plus public sector undertakings pattern to bring up harmony of agriculture industries to address rising unemployment? I think the question becomes relevant because the pandemic has exposed more than ever before the fact that you cannot have unbridled faith in the market. I mean, the magic of market will solve the problem.
But I think you shouldn't mix it all up.
Yeah. I think this question...
Federalism involves relationship with center and state and local government.
Yeah.
And how the money is to be, responsibilities and resources are going to be divided among them.
Yeah, here he's talking about public sector undertaking.
Other things, are issues, very important issues, but not directly tied with federalism, except in the fact Kerala wants to have public sector, Kerala wants to have promotion of public health and public education. There must be fiscal freedom. the domain, the fiscal space for the state must be large enough, wide enough to make that choice.
Okay. It is time for the government to realize how economic reliefs and tax cuts miss informal economy, which takes a part of, part in VAT, municipal taxes, and electricity bills, etc. This is somebody from
See,
K. Chandrasekhar.
the importance of tax cuts to deal with the situation has been revealed. India government cut corporate taxes by 1.75 lakh crores. Maybe Prime Minister going to America wanted to demonstrate he is also a tax reduction program. But whatever it is, what has been the outcome? No additional investment has gone down. Only the profits in the balance sheets have gone up, and therefore shares have risen, and a lot of cash balance in the hands of the companies. So you cannot handle this situation by changing tax rates and so on. Today, two newspapers, Business Standard and I think Business Line, carried proposals for changes. One argued for, report said India government is considering raising the tax. Another report discussing how tax rate can be brought down. I don't think this is a time to do any of that.
Perumal Vallinayagam from Tamil Nadu, I suppose. It is not natural. It's not a natural calamity. Our infrastructure is as it is. The problem is temporarily holding the economic activities. To start the same, we may use the reserve money, no need of additional tax. This is taxing.
This is not temporary phenomenon. It can be long-run phenomena also. Look at demonetization. Over 3 months, 1 month, 2 months, there was no money at all. Now, then money came in, within 6 months came back to normal. What was the assumption of the policy makers? They thought now money comes back, all those small firms which folded up will rise again. But the fact is, the reason for the big slowdown we started with demonetization is that many of the informal sector units which closed down because of demonetization never picked up again. You can go to so many places. I've gone to Tirupur. See, it's again a graveyard-like situation. It takes time. So therefore, now there's nothing automatic coming up. If you want the MSME sector to emerge again, you will have to have a package for them. Minimum that is required is extend the interest. Calculations have been made. Farmers and small industrialists, their interest are way for year. It will come to 1.5 lakh or something nearer to 2 lakh crores of rupees. If you don't need 2 minutes to decide upon to give 1.75 lakh crores to corporates, why can't you write off this interest? Some working capital additional accommodation, then that's a program, then they will revive. Otherwise, no.
Two questions. This one is it possible to allocate certain percentage of CGST and IGST towards COVID package instead of putting additional burden to taxpayers through cess or anything?
So what do I do with what I have budgeted for? The CGST, IGST all have been budgeted for certain purposes.
Okay.
It's not taking money from one purpose and putting another. There is no additional money required. And therefore, additional resources that we found through monetization of debt.
Is there a huge are there huge retail investors looking out for Government of India bond, tax-free bond? COVID-19 bond could be issued with 3 and 5 or 10-year tenure. But
nobody is looking for anything. They are afraid of bonds and old papers. Everybody would like to keep money in their hands, and Indian rupee depreciating, that is so dangerous. Now, therefore, they are buying gold, and therefore gold prices are going up. There is an aversion to all bonds and papers and so on.
we must be tired. I think there are. I think one question. I think this will be absolutely agree. Yunanta Kumar Selvam. Professor Ghosh is around. There's a question addressing the professor. No, she's not.
No,
Okay.
no, I don't think.
Akhile, now, I think what are the options available to the states for meeting their expenditure if
I'm
they
here,
don't
Joseph,
get
if you
subsidy?
want.
Oh, there.
Oh, you are here.
He's there. You come on, give it. Connect.
Yeah. I'm not visible, but I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. This is to Professor Ghosh. One definitely understands the difficulty in our attempts to decentralize the country. Okay, but it has been 27 years since we amended the constitution for 73rd, 74th time, leading to enactment of Panchayati Raj Act. How many more years do we wait? What Professor Arora says needs consideration, that there should be collective will and mobilization to realize the goal of Panchayati Raj in the country. I think it is a comment from one of the old JNU students. I think it is only, no, I think he would have remembered the professor, that's why. Started with the professor. Yeah, I think we can, what are the options available to the states for meeting their expenditure if they don't get sufficient financial support from the central government? I think this is a very the question which I think a number of these things that how the states should be moving forward. That's I think many insight came from there. The opening question.
Okay, Joyde, I will read to you a question to you.
Yeah.
50% of the tax, 2%, 50% of the tax, 2% from the super rich. So collected have to be distributed among the poor, financially stressed to tide over economic crisis. So Dr. Nandakumar is arguing you have a super rich tax, then transfer it to the poor. There has been, what we have been discussing is that you monetize the debt. What would you prefer and what? Why? Hello, Jayade.
Jayade, are you online? No. It's got muted.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. I would say.
By Dr. Nandakumar.
No, I heard it. I had the question. I had the question. So my answer would be, at this point, there is really no possibility of raising taxes other than wealth tax. Everybody's income is collapsing. That is true for the workers, that is true for farmers, that is small industry, that is true for large industry. Everybody's incomes are collapsing. Raising taxes at this point in the middle of a massive downswing is never very productive. So at this moment, your objective is to revive demand and also to revive supply, because we have to remember the supply chain is broken. You cannot do this by taking away more demand, which you will do through taxation. You have to just go out and spend. And the great thing about governments is that they can go out and spend by borrowing from the central bank. So globally, this is not some crazy economist from JNU saying, globally, nobody in the world is monetizing their deficit. ECB has issued endless bonds. The US is doing it. The Bank of Canada is doing it. Australia is doing it. Singapore is doing it. Malaysia is doing it. There is nobody sensible in the world except the Indian government. Nobody else is saying that we will do this by raising taxes.
Okay, there is one more question to you.
To monetize your deficit.
There is one more question to you by Nilachala Acharya. You said about 5% of GDP has to be given to the rescue, put in the rescue package.
Yeah.
Please explain some more from where this 5% GDP will come. Is this additional fund is above the existing budget? If it is so, what will happen to private sector loan? Suppose the question is, you are borrowing additional 5%, which would mean almost entire financial savings, which is about 10-11%, is borrowed by the state and center. And therefore, what will the private sector do? That's Nilachala Acharya asking you.
Spending, and the basis for the calculation for this is what we need at a minimum to ensure food for everybody who needs it, and a minimum income transfer of 7,000 rupees to 80% of the population who needs it, by household who needs it, and so on. Okay, so we have a calculation on that basis saying that the total of and the required health spending will come to about 5% of GDP additional. At least 4% of this must come through simply borrowing from the central bank. This does not eat into other savings available for private investors. In any case, as you mentioned, Isaac, banks are not willing to lend, but investors are also not willing to borrow. When the economy is in a downslide like this, nobody is willing to borrow or spend. So somebody has to go in there and break that logjam, and it can only be the government. So this does not, I mean, there is no such thing as this iron box of savings from which if the government takes out, then the private sector loses. If you raise economic activity, you will raise the total volume of savings. If you allow economic activity to fall, your total volume of savings will fall. And in fact, they will actually be less, even for private investors. Not that they would ever invest in the first place when the economy is sliding down. I'm very surprised because he's a student, so he should already know this.
Then I think Jayaraman, I think it is a Bombay Jayaraman, has a question to you. It's a long question, I'll read. The Hindu report of Sanjeev Sanyal, Chief Economic Advisor, remarks on the economic response to COVID-19 mentioned 3 important points. 1, that no big bang package would be announced and all announcements would have to be incremental, and that big developed countries have indeed erred in implementing such a strategy. 2, that this approach has been appreciated by international investors. 3, that economic package would be the occasion also for important large-scale reforms. Will the panelists care to comment on the implications of this remark?
Who has made this argument?
The Sanjeev Sanyal in Hindu.
Yeah.
I think article in Hindu.
Yes, he's the economic advisor in the finance ministry. I agree with all. I disagree with all 3 points. I think it is terrible to use an increment. It's like you're falling down and you're saying, I will try and put 1 inch up instead on the cliff at the rate of 100 miles per hour. So incremental is not going to work at this point. International investors have not appreciated this. They are leaving the country. We have experienced very capital flight. They don't love us anymore. So let us get that clear. International investors do not appreciate this. And the third point.
Third point is economic package should also be the occasion for important large-scale reforms. The reason they are saying is that. Let me just explain. Now, the present pandemic economic crisis, not just a demand crisis, but also supply chains are broken. And therefore, they say demand raising, all right, you give more money for demand, but there must also be fundamental basic reforms in the supply to restore the supply. How do you respond to that?
I completely agree, but I think the reforms I would ask for might be the opposite of what this person is asking for. I would say, yes, supply chains are broken. Yes, if we want to ensure the continued stable production of mass consumption items, we have to actually ensure their production, which means also looking at the input-output relationships and the distribution. That requires coordination between center and states and departments. In other words, it requires planning. So for me, the big necessary reform on the supply side today would be to bring back
Yeah. You see, there are questions being raised, number of people. Is it a right idea to have an interim budget? What's your opinion? The finance generally.
Yeah, I think Professor Joydeep is offline.
Just me.
Oh, yeah.
Only me,
Yeah.
nobody else. Look, I mean,
Okay. I thought you were tired.
okay, let me put it this way. Previous budget is meaningless. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that that budget, frankly, it was meaningless even before because none of the numbers made even before. But now, of course, there's no question that that budget has no meaning whatsoever. So yes, it's a new budget.
So I think we'll close the day.
I think those who raised the question, thank you very much. Hope we have been able to kind of satisfy you to some extent at least. Keep asking questions because these are not we are not living in a world where there is anyone with the solutions in the pocket to take and give. Only through questioning and deliberation we can come up with to answers. So thank you very much.
Joydeep, do you like the cover of the new edition?
The private talk.
Okay, let's go.
Thank you. That's great. I think well, I suppose by and large.
Fine.